This is an ABC News special report. The Supreme Court rules.
And I am George Stephanopoulos here in New York. We're breaking in right now because the Supreme Court has handed down a decision on gay marriage, on the Defense of Marriage Act. I want to go right to ABC's Terry Moran at the court. Terry?
All right, George, I'm waiting for the actual opinion itself, but our excellent colleagues inside have told us that that Defense of Marriage Act, which for federal law defined marriage as the union of one man, one woman only, denied all federal benefits to gay couples, that has been ruled unconstitutional by Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, writing for the court. And what's important here, George, is that Kennedy is holding that that is a denial of the equal protection of the laws to gay Americans. Not just that the Congress shouldn't tell the states what to do. That would have been the more modest way to rule here. But this is essentially, this decision which I've just gotten is a declaration of equal rights for gay Americans under federal law. It is big. Let me take a look at it, but that is the first blush reading. The Defense of Marriage Act.
I want you to take a look at it right now. It's a 5-4 decision. Anthony Kennedy in the majority, as you said. Justice Scalia dissenting, also Justice Thomas and the Chief Justice joining in part. I want to bring in ABC's chief legal anchor, Dan Abrams, right now. The Defense of Marriage Act, of course. Now, what this means is that couples who are legally married anywhere in the United States will be able to get the federal benefits, things like Social Security and death benefits.
Right. This was a case where you were talking about states that actually allowed gay marriage, but were then denied federal benefits because of the Defense of Marriage Act. So this is a big win, but if the opinion is as sweeping as it sounds like it is, that's going to be a big surprise, meaning everyone was expecting there to be some narrowness to this ruling, not an all-out recognition that there is an equal protection issue here, because if there is, you would think that would also mean that it applies to the other case that the U.S. Supreme Court is considering with regard to Proposition 8 in California. We'll have to see.
And you hear those cheers right now as people are learning about this decision. That's in San Francisco. We're still waiting for the decision on what's going to happen with Proposition 8, the case about Proposition 8, which banned marriage in California.
I should just say, the opinion is confined to those lawful marriages, so maybe Proposition 8 wouldn't apply.
Well, that's going to be coming up. But when you get to that definition of lawful marriages, this is where it could get tricky as well. Will the court say that this is confined to where the marriage took place, correct, or where the married people now live?
I'm pretty certain that it's going to mean that the president would have to step in if they want to extend it to say, if you're married in one state, you move to another state, you're still going to need, I think, an additional push there to guarantee that.
Okay, let's go back to Terry Moran at the court. You've had a chance to look through the opinion?
I have indeed. And there is ringing language in here affirming the equal dignity and the equal rights of gay Americans under the federal law. And this is from Justice Anthony Kennedy. He notes that this case is the case of a widow, Edie Windsor, who married her longtime partner, Thea Spire, in the early part of this century. Their marriage was recognized by the state of New York. When her partner died, when Thea died, the IRS said, we don't recognize your marriage because the Defense of Marriage Act won't let us. Pay us $363,000 in estate taxes no straight widow would have had to pay. So I will read you briefly from the opinion of Justice Kennedy, who says, New York acted to give their lawful conduct a lawful status. The status is a far-reaching legal acknowledgement of the intimate relationship between two people, a relationship deemed by the state worthy of dignity in the community, equal with all other marriages. It reflects the community's considered perspective on the roots of the institution of marriage and the evolving understanding of the meaning of equality. And then he says that the federal government cannot say that gay people are not lawfully married if New York says so. He says the federal statute here is invalid, for there no legitimate purpose overcomes the purpose and effect to otherwise to disparage and injure those whom the state has deemed to protect. That was a little complicated, but basically what Justice Kennedy has said is that the Congress can't say you aren't married if New York has.
And this is in keeping with Justice Kennedy's principles enunciated in so many other cases, sweeping definitions of what human liberty and human freedom mean.
That's right, and he is sometimes often criticized by conservatives because when he gets a hold of a case like this, he uses this sweeping, ringing language about human dignity, about the meaning of life and love and intimate relations. And this opinion on the Defense of Marriage Act is everything gay rights activists, people who support marriage equality, same-sex marriage, gay marriage, whatever you want to say, it's everything they could have asked for.
And Dan Abrams, let me bring you back in here because there's an interesting quote here from page 20 of Anthony Kennedy's opinion, setting what is called a careful consideration standard in determining whether a law is motivated by improper animus or purpose. Discriminations of an unusual character especially require careful consideration. DOMA cannot survive under these principles.
Yeah, I mean that's the heart of the ruling here as to why Justice Kennedy and the other four didn't feel this could survive. But remember, there's another issue at play here, and that's federal versus states' rights, which is this is a federal law telling states how to behave. And that is something that Justice Kennedy has always been concerned about. Justice Kennedy has always, and in particular in the questioning in this case, was very focused on ensuring that states have the right to make these decisions for themselves. And that's why this case is different from the other case we're waiting for today with regard to Proposition 8, because there it's the state of California making a determination about what its law should be.
And as you said, we're still waiting for that. But I do want to go to ABC's Cecilia Vega out in San Francisco this morning because we did hear those cheers when the decision was brought down.
Resounding cheers here in San Francisco City Hall, George. This is the hub of the gay marriage movement in California. Take a listen right here. You can hear these people behind me. You can see the cheers. It's tough for me to tell if there's a new decision on Prop 8 yet. I don't believe so. I think they're still reacting to the DOMA decision. We are seeing in this crowd right now, we are seeing tears. We are seeing couples who clearly have been together for a long time, clutching each other, waiting eagerly for this Proposition 8 decision to find out what the state is for the thousands, tens of thousands, 18,000 people, same-sex couples who remain married in California right now, who were married before Proposition 8 made that illegal. Again, just take a look at what's happening right here. The San Francisco City Hall opened early this morning to let people in. This is the only place, sort of the community hub, where people can watch collectively this decision come down. You can't see this beautiful ornate building behind me, but there are people up on the second floor balcony just looking down at this. There are media packed into the rafters here. We will hear the mayor speak. We will hear from the Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, who was behind that move to allow same-sex couples to marry in California in 2004, the case that prompted that fight that is so historic now, and we're any minute away, George, from a decision here.
And we do see the Lieutenant Governor there, Gavin Newsom, there with you. Want to get his quick reaction to this ruling. Governor Newsom, are you there?
Well, George, pretty exciting. I got to say, though, you know, we're all on our best behavior right now and hope and expectation that we see a similar fate to Proposition 8 here up next. But significant nonetheless, that notion of federalism, this idea that the federal government cannot discriminate against people that have been lawfully married in states across this country is a big decision. Hats off to the President of the United States and for those that fought hard since 1996 to right this wrong.
Stand by, Governor. We're going to come back to you as soon as we learn about Proposition 8. But I do want to go to Capitol Hill right now. ABC's Jeff Zeleny on Capitol Hill. As the governor just said, this was passed in 1996, signed into law by President Clinton in 1996. The Obama administration refused to defend the law before the Supreme Court, so a subcommittee of the Congress, of the House, had to come in and do it.
That's right, George. And this is an example of how fast this issue is moving. Really, some 13 months ago, only a year ago, President Obama kind of reluctantly was forced into coming out just in support of gay marriage in general because of his Vice President, Joe Biden. And since then, we've seen a sea change here on Capitol Hill. Some 25 senators have essentially rushed to announce their support for same-sex marriage, including 3 Republican senators. Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski was the latest one just a week ago or so. Hillary Clinton just came out in support of gay marriage only 2 months ago. So this issue in the country has moved much faster than it has in the legal system, in the courts.
There's no question about that, Jeff. Any reaction so far from those who defended DOMA or any sense if they're going to be trying to take any action in the Congress?
We haven't heard any reaction yet, but there was some discussion of that yesterday. Really, all televisions on Capitol Hill are tuning into what's happening just across the street at the Supreme Court. And there is a lot of resistance to this. It's important to point out that not everyone believes that this is the right decision, as we're seeing from the dissent being read by Justice Scalia right now. So I do expect that there will be, significant and predictable opposition to this.
Let's bring in Tony Perkins now, a supporter of the Defense of Marriage Act from the Family Research Council. Your reaction?
Well, I think when you talk about federalism, federalism goes both ways. What you have here now is the states defining for the federal government what benefits will have to be extended. So I do think you'll have some pushback from Congress, because this deals with the purse in many ways, is what financial benefits, what other benefits will be extended to these various states, these 12 jurisdictions that have redefined natural marriage.
I want to bring in Dan Abrams, bringing Dan Abrams back right now, because there's something in the dissents in this case which give a clue to how the court is going to hold in the Proposition 8 case.
Right. It's not for sure, but it does seem that there is some language in the dissent here which suggests that the Proposition 8 case would be dismissed based on standing, meaning the state of California wasn't willing to defend this case. They said, we don't want to be in part
Just
of
like
this.
President Obama didn't want to
That's
defend
right, when it came to DOMA. So in DOMA, the House Republicans were the ones who defended it, and some of the conservatives who dissented in this said there should have been a jurisdiction issue there. But more importantly, when it comes to the Proposition 8 case, they may dismiss this, saying that the people who are defending it had no right to be there, meaning they weren't injured by this case, and as a result, they don't have standing to argue it. That would be a sort of technical way to dismiss the Proposition 8 case, and based on the dissent in the DOMA case, it seems that will likely be the outcome with regard to Proposition 8.
I want to bring that to Terry Moran out of the court. From these dissents, Terry, some clues that the Proposition 8 case may be found to have no standing, as Dan Abrams was just explaining. That would mean, if it holds, that marriage will be legal in the state of California, but it would only apply to the state of California, correct?
Well, it would, on the Prop 8 case, there are two clues in this opinion. One, at the end of the opinion that Justice Kennedy wrote, he says, this opinion and its holding are confined to the lawful marriages in the 12 states and the Districts of Columbia which allow gay marriage. So he says that's what's limited. And then, as you point out, Justice Roberts says, in the Prop 8 case, we said they didn't have standing, as Dan was explaining. So it seems as if the DOMA ruling, which I'm holding in my hand, which is this broad ruling saying equal protection, forbids the Congress from recognizing the marriages of gay couples, that is going to be not the holding in the Prop 8 case. In fact, yeah.
Go ahead. Let's take those one at a time, and then I'm going to bring in Dan Abrams as well. If this is indeed confined to the 12 states where marriage is legal, does that mean if a couple is married legally in New York, but then they move to Oklahoma, they cannot get the federal benefits when they live in Oklahoma?
That's a complicated question, but basically, if a couple is legally married in New York and they move to a state like Oklahoma where there is no legal recognition of their marriage, the federal government must recognize their lawful marriage on many, many issues. The problem is some federal benefits are granted to you based on the state where you were married as a married couple, and some federal benefits are granted on the state where you live as a married couple. So gay couples will have to, if they're moving, will have to go to a lawyer and see which federal benefits they're going to qualify for and which they won't.
The most basic way to look at these two opinions, if the Prop 8 case comes out the way we think it is the court is saying you cannot discriminate against gay couples, but we're not saying that there's a fundamental right for gays to marry. So basically they're saying if there is a state where the marriage has been recognized, you can't discriminate against them. But what we're not saying, if we're right about the Prop 8 ruling, is that there is a fundamental right for gays to marry.
Which would strike down the bans on gay marriage in 36 states where they now hold.
Right. So if there is a really big difference there, and I think it's important in distinguishing between what the DOMA ruling says and how you can reconcile these two, because some people are going to say, wait a sec, this sounds like incredibly sweeping language in the DOMA decision. It is, but it relates to discrimination against gays and not the fundamental right to gay marriage.
Let me bring that back to Terry Moran. So the implication of this, Terry, would be that the court would be saying, again, for federal purposes, a marriage has to be recognized, but they're going to be leaving the question of whether or not to recognize marriages to play out in all of the states.
That's right. They want this great conversation that's happening across the country on this issue to continue. But this case, the DOMA case, has a bomb in it. It has a seed in it. It has a recognition that the Constitution's guarantee of the equal protection of the laws includes, as far as congressional legislation, the equal protection to gay married couples. It's just a half step forward to say it includes the equal protection of all the marriage laws in all the states. It's just a half step away. They didn't do that. It looks like they didn't do that today, but this is a very strong precedent for those who favor gay marriage rights to go forward in the courts and in the elections.
And as Jeff Zeleny was pointing out, it comes at a time when there's been so much support growing, Dan Abrams, for gay marriage. I want to put up a poll that shows how much the support have changed just in the last 10 years. Back in 2004, only 32% of the country supported gay marriage. Now that's up to 57% in 2013. And look at this generational divide, and this is what is most stunning. Under the age of 30, 76% of the public supports gay marriage. Over the age of 65, only 40%. So there does seem to be tremendous momentum.
But opponents of gay marriage, at least in the courts, are saying, okay, great, let the public decide. Let's let them deal with it. Let's let the democratic system work. And instead, what the other side is saying is, fair enough, but there's also fundamental constitutional issues at play here. So both sides are using those polls kind of as a sword, depending on what the issue is.
And Cecilia Vega out in California, I know that supporters of same-sex marriage out in that state right now believe that if Proposition 8 were to come up before the voters today, it would indeed go down.
And that's the people here are exceptionally confident of that. If, in fact, Proposition 8 stands, people here say that they will put it back on the ballot, and they are convinced that the tide has shifted in their favor. And we've been out here for days, George, talking to people in the city of San Francisco, and virtually everyone that we have met feels like the public opinion when it comes to same-sex marriage is on their side right now. And they're confident that the ruling from the Supreme Court today will be on their side as well. If that doesn't happen, we're going to see a lot of very upset people here in this city. In fact, only in San Francisco have they planned for a celebration this evening. The Castro District, the historically gay neighborhood here in San Francisco, is preparing for a huge celebration tonight. They're planning on bringing in music and DJs and closing the streets down. There were no plans, no formal plans for a protest here. Again, you can see this crowd here behind me in San Francisco City Hall, this building that has been the hub of same-sex marriages back in 2004 when they started under then Governor Gavin Newsom. The support for same-sex marriage was in the low 30s. Today, you mentioned that poll, George, it's up to 57% around the country. So here, clearly, the sentiment they feel is on their side. We hope to wait in just a few minutes and find out whether it is or not. We will see.
Let me go back to Terry Moran. Terry, if the Proposition 8 case does indeed turn on whether the fact that there was not standing, if that's indeed what the court decides, that could lead to a situation where you see many, many more lawsuits now challenging marriage bans, both by statute and constitutional bans, in all the states that now have them.
Absolutely, because a decision on Prop 8 that doesn't get to the merits, that doesn't get to the real issue, does the Constitution protect, under the notion of equal protection of the laws, gay couples' right to marry anywhere in this country? If it doesn't reach that, it's an invitation to more lawsuits. And as I said, in this case, the Defense of Marriage Act case, since Justice Kennedy's language concerning gay couples and their essential human dignity under the federal laws and the way that the Congress must recognize that essential human equality and dignity as couples, those lawsuits will go forward armed with language from the Supreme Court itself. And as Dan pointed out, one of the things that's happening here is the Supreme Court is looking at this astonishing democratic discussion, this very fast transformation in public opinion that's happened over the past 10, 20 years, and looking at it in some wonder, and essentially they want the voters to do the job.
Well, they want the voters to do the job, but I want to bring this to Dan Abrams. From my quick reading of the notes coming in, it does also say, it seemed to suggest that the court wants to set a standard where they say, if you're going to pass a law banning gay marriage, you better be sure that the motivation is not discrimination.
That's right, and what they're also saying is it's almost impossible to have that kind of law without it being discriminatory, and that's what Justice Kennedy is saying in his ruling here, is that the justification here falls, that the claims by those supporting the Defense of Marriage Act aren't sufficient to overcome constitutional scrutiny.
We have the first reaction coming in from President Obama. He's got a tweet coming in. And I want to play that right now. The original tweet, we see it right there. Today's DOMA ruling is a historic step forward for marriage equality. President Obama, of course, is on his way to Africa right now with his family, going to be there for most of the rest of the week. We're still standing by, Terry Moran, for the actual decision on Proposition 8 to come in and go a little bit more into this standing issue on who actually turned out to be defending the law in the state of California, because, of course, the governor would not do it.
That's right. It's a somewhat technical legal issue, but the way you said it is the way to understand it. Neither Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger nor Governor Jerry Brown would defend this law. So who's going to defend the law in the court when the couples who wanted to get married brought it to court? As it turns out, there's a part of California law which says the proponents of a ballot initiative, of a referendum, can be designated as the ones to represent the state and defend the law. The California Supreme Court approved of that. But in this court, during oral arguments, these justices were very concerned about that. They said private citizens don't have any accountability to the state, to the taxpayers of the state. They could spend as much money as they want on a lawsuit. They could say anything they want in the lawsuit, the most vile, prejudicial things, for example, and they aren't accountable to the people of California. And they said, basically, we don't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry coming up saying, I'm representing North Carolina today, I'm representing Illinois today, that standing in the federal court is tougher, more narrow than the California courts allow. So that's basically what we're looking at.
But it is kind of fascinating that in both the DOMA case and the Prop 8 case, you don't have the U.S. government defending a U.S. law, and you don't have the state of California in Prop 8 defending a California law. And that creates these sort of interesting defenders who come forward and say, okay, we understand the government won't defend their own law, so we will come in instead and say we're either advocates on behalf of this law or the House Republicans, as the case may be. But I find that just to be very interesting.
But again, and what the court here did, though, is they decided some people did believe that they might try to make the same standing argument with the DOMA case and say, since the federal government isn't defending it, we shouldn't even be considering it. They did not do that.
There were a number of technical ways that they could have gotten rid of the DOMA case, and they didn't do that. And as Terry has been pointing out, the nature of the language we're hearing from Justice Kennedy here is going to be cited in the future, no matter what the Prop 8 ruling is. And we should point out that here's the language from the dissent in DOMA, which tells us what we think the opinion is going to be in Prop 8. We may in the future have to resolve challenges to state marriage definitions affecting same-sex couples. That issue, however, is not before us in this case, and we hold today that we lack jurisdiction to consider it in the particular context of Hollingsworth versus Perry. So the fact that they're not going to resolve that case means, as Terry points out, there's going to be additional litigation, and they're going to come forward and they're going to say, look at what Justice Kennedy said in DOMA. That's more than just saying don't discriminate.
Let me bring that to Tony Perkins again. I want to bring in Tony Perkins from the Family Research Council. Again, when you look at that language from Justice Kennedy, does it make you fear that marriage bans in those 36 states which have them are now vulnerable?
I don't think so. I mean, I think what we're trying to do here, what they were trying to do and what they're trying to do in Prop 8, and we'll wait to see what the decision is on that, is that it is to try to impose a one-size-fits-all upon the entire nation of redefining marriage. This decision on DOMA is limited to those jurisdictions, as we now understand it. And so if this idea that this is going to happen, if it's inevitable and the trends are all that way, it is interesting that they've gone to the courts to try to impose same-sex marriage on the nation. I would suggest that time is not on their side, because as more jurisdictions that adopt same-sex marriage, realize the implications of this. It affects religious liberty. It affects parental rights in terms of what their children are taught. It has a lot of other factors involved here than just the marriage altar. This is really about altering the entire landscape of America.
Don't want to interrupt you, but we all want to go back to the court now with Terry Moran, because we do now have the decision on Proposition 8.
We do, and it is, as we've been talking about, Chief Justice Roberts saying the defenders of the law have no standing. They've got no right to defend this law. If the governor of California won't, we can't hear this case. And so it's a punt. It's no decision. The practical result of that is that the original ruling by Judge Vaughn Walker in San Francisco, which struck down Prop 8, will stand. And that will likely mean that in the near future, gay couples in California will be able to marry, will have a federal constitutional right to marry. It leaves for another day the question of the whole country, although there's one very interesting detail in this. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the opinion for 6 members of the court in dissent. The dissenters saying, no, we can decide this case. We want to decide this case. Justice Alito, Justice Scalia, and Justice Anthony Kennedy, who had just written this sweeping opinion on the equal human dignity and equal human rights of gay couples. One might read the tea leaves saying he wanted to decide this case because he wanted to do that.
That's what I was just going to ask you. Does it suggest to you, and maybe we'll find out more in this over time, that perhaps Justice Kennedy did want to apply that sweeping standard, said let's deal with this once and for all right now?
Well, look, he clearly wanted to decide both cases. He wrote one case in language that is almost poetic in its embrace and affirmation of the equal status, as far as Congress is concerned, of legally married gay couples. If he took up Prop 8, which denied the right of denied gay couples the ability to marry in California, he'd have to go a long way not to embrace the words he'd just written. So one can assume that he would have struck it down.
Let's go back to California now. Cecilia Vega there, the reaction.
Well, it still hasn't been announced here on this screen, George, so you will see it if you stay with us any second, I'm sure. We know it. We've been talking about it here amongst ourselves, having heard it through you guys. And I just asked Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom if this is a good thing. He said it's 90% a really good thing. We have heard from the San Francisco City Attorney in memos that have been released pre this decision, and we do know that since this decision is that Prop 8 stands, that gay same-sex marriages will take place here in California, if all goes according to plan, sometime between mid to the end of July. We know here in San Francisco, for example, 64 volunteers have already been deputized to begin officiating at those marriages, and we fully expect here in California to literally see a race to the altar for same-sex couples. I believe we're going to see this. I'm going to step aside because I believe we are going to see this decision come in any minute. Again, we're in San Francisco City Hall. Couples have been gathered here all morning. You can see this crowd is just absolutely packed. What you can't see off camera, what I want to try to convey to you, is the magnitude of this crowd. People are literally hanging over the second floor balcony, waiting for this decision. We've got early cheers. When DOMA, the decision on DOMA came down, this crowd just erupted. There were cheers, there was elation. And this is a crowd that fully expects to see the Supreme Court rule in favor of gay marriage. This is a movement here in California that has been long-standing. Before Proposition 8 was banned, became illegal as a voter proposition in 2008, we saw 18,000 couples get married here in the state of California, and those people are still married today, and they will benefit from this ruling in Proposition 8. They will see federal benefits that have only existed for opposite-sex couples, now benefiting them from health care to military benefits to Social Security to tax. And again, really, people are just on pins and needles here waiting for this decision. I'm surprised it hasn't come in here yet, because when it does, I guarantee you, you will hear this crowd erupt.
We'll stand by and listen to that.
Cheer.
Let me just thank you, Cecilia. We'll stand by and listen for that. Let me just reset the scene now. It's 10:30 in the West Coast, 10:30 here on the East Coast, 7:30 on the West Coast. We do have the 2 major decisions on same-sex marriage from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision led by Justice Anthony Kennedy, has struck down the Defense of Marriage Act, which defined marriage as between a man and a woman. So from now on, anyone who is legally married, gay couples legally married in the 12 states where it is now legal, will receive the full federal benefits. The second case, Hollingsworth v. Perry, which dealt with the Proposition 8 banning gay marriage in California, has been thrown out for lack of standing, which means that gay marriage will once again be legal in the state of California, even though they have not yet announced that there in California. We're seeing crowds in San Francisco there as well. Huge crowd outside of the Supreme Court this morning as well. This is just the beginning, though, Dan Abrams, of many more fights to come because of the way the Supreme Court decided that Proposition 8 case. It's going to be an invitation for couples who want to be married in the states where it's now illegal to come forward and say, I want my rights respected.
Let's take a step back, which is based on the expectations coming into these two cases. These cases taken together are a win for same-sex couples. Now, they're going to say this isn't enough, it needs to go further, fair enough. But based on what people were expecting, predicting with regard to these two cases, this is a big win. The sweeping language in the DOMA case, in conjunction with effectively the punt in the Proposition 8 case, which is going to allow now same-sex couples to get married in California, on the whole is a big win for same-sex couples.
That's right. Even though they did not go so far as to strike down laws banning gay marriage across the country, they did give that opportunity going forward.
They're basically saying, in effect, without saying it, we're going to address that question later. They're going to have to address that question at some point. And because of the language Justice Kennedy used, because they didn't rule on Proposition 8, you've got to believe that issue is going to come up again in front of the court.
Let's go back to Gavin Newsom, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, out in California. First, your reaction to the Proposition 8 decision, and then try to lay out for us what's going to happen right now in the state of California with gay marriages.
Well, George, we're just literally a second away from this crowd about to erupt. This is a big victory for those that wanted to right the wrong of Proposition 8 and overturn it. There'll be legal same-sex marriages in California within the next month or so. There'll also be a lot of litigation, I think, to clean up. So there's still going to be some pending issues. But this is a profound moment for every single person here. Remember, this isn't about a legal brief. This is not a Supreme Court ruling. This is about real people, real lives that are being affirmed and about to be affirmed in a pretty remarkable and special way.
How is it going to be announced there?
Well, they're announcing it. They're all watching a network not to be named, George, and for whatever reason, there's a delay. And so when they hear it, they're going to, trust me, erupt, and you and I won't be able to hear each other, and I won't be able to talk over them.
Okay, well, I do. Some parts of San Francisco are aware of what's happened. We want to show some of that right now, some of the initial celebrations in places where they first learned. You see it right there. But they have not learned that yet at the City Hall in San Francisco. I want to go quickly back to Capitol Hill for Jeff Zeleny there. You're starting to get some reaction from Republican aides on Capitol Hill about how this might affect both the 2014 and 2016 elections and how they might respond in the Congress?
We are, George. And first and foremost, most Republicans on the ballot in 2014 and those who may be on the ballot in 2016 simply don't want to make this a front and center issue. Now, of course, the presidential campaign begins in a state that already has gay marriage in Iowa. But one top Republican strategist tells me just a moment ago that he believes that there will be at least one candidate, maybe more than one candidate, on the Republican side who supports same-sex marriage in 2016. And that would be a complete sea change from just the last presidential campaign and certainly the 2008 presidential campaign when Prop 8 first began in California.
Let me bring that to Tony Perkins. Tony, where do you go next, and what kind of pressures do you expect to be brought to bear on Republican candidates going forward?
Well, I think understanding this decision, as has been discussed, it's really the court punting on this issue, not addressing the merits of it. You still have, after the effects of this, you'll have 37 jurisdictions, states in the country that define marriage as a union of a man and woman. This is a very limited decision. Granted, it would have been better had they, had regard for the voters of California that have voted twice to define marriage according to its natural definition. But you still have, again, 37 jurisdictions that will have marriage as the definition of a man and a woman. That's overwhelming. Again, I think the reason they're going to the court is that they know that time is not on their side because of the ramifications of changing this definition. It impacts the family, it impacts education, it impacts religious liberty. And so I think the court didn't want to tackle that. And I'm not sure that the outcome will be what supporters of same-sex marriage want when the court does get to it.
Let me press you on that notion of time being on the side of opponents of same-sex marriage. How do you square that with the remarkable shift we've seen in public opinion over the last decade or so?
Well, what you have seen is you've only had same-sex marriage in jurisdictions in the last couple of years where it's been, you've got 12 now, 12 states. But the reality is you have not had a chance to see, individuals have not seen the implications of this, where the curriculum in the schools are taught, our children are taught morals that contradict with what their parents are teaching them. We've got florists, we've got bakers, others who are being sued, losing their businesses because they refuse to participate in same-sex marriages because of their religious convictions. We've had churches that have lost tax exemptions as a result of not performing same-sex unions. So when people begin to see that this is about much more than the marriage altar, that it's really about fundamentally altering the landscape of America, I don't think they'll be as eager to move down this path toward same-sex marriage. So I don't think that time is on the side of those who want to redefine marriage. That's why they've gone to the court to try to impose this on the nation, and they failed today.
Thank you, Tony Perkins. Let me go back to Terry Moran at the Supreme Court. Terry, as we said from the beginning of this day, an historic day on the Supreme Court. They have now ruled that the Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional. They have said basically that the states are going to fight out state by state whether or not marriage can be legal. Same-sex marriages can be legal. And as you've been pointing out all morning, it has been done with sweeping rhetoric from Justice Anthony Kennedy.
Absolutely. Tony Perkins is right. The landscape is what it is. Most states do not permit gay couples to marry. But those who favor marriage equality, same-sex marital rights, took a huge step forward today in language like this. This is how Justice Anthony Kennedy, the key swing vote, described New York and the other states' decision to allow same-sex couples, he says, these states have said, should have the right to marry. He could have ended the sentence there. And so live with pride in themselves and their union and in a status of equality with all other married persons. You put language like that in a Supreme Court opinion, that'll come back and be law in a while.
And we just saw the reaction in San Francisco as they learned that marriage will once again be legal for same-sex couples in the state of California. Thanks to all my colleagues for that today. We're going to sign off right now. Before we go, though, we want to know what you think about these Supreme Court decisions. Tell us on Twitter using the hashtags you see on screen right there. We're always going to be reporting on this all day long on abcnews.com. Have a full report tonight on world news from this historic day at the Supreme Court. I'm George Stephanopoulos in New York.
This has been a special report from ABC News.